This video I'm going to be starting on the back end of the transmission. I'm going to be replacing the rear seal and rollerizing the rear output. To do that, I'm going to be using a seal from the Jake's Performance Freshen Up kit, a Turbo 350 pump bearing, which is a 3-piece roller bearing, the shim kit that comes along with the bearing, and I'm going to be using a Turbo 350 or 4L80 anti-walkout bushing for the rear. And that'll give us a nice surface for our rear carrier assembly to roll on. Start by using the snap ring pliers, squeeze, and I'll pull the snap ring out. And we should be able to punch the seal out of here. Next, I'm just going to take a pry bar and we'll yank this seal out. I'll go ahead and punch this seal out. Just going to be careful not to damage the case at all. And while we're back here, I'm going to go ahead and knock this plug out. This is a 2-wheel drive transmission and I'm going to be converting it to an all-wheel drive, so I need to put a solid plug in there. This orifice plug goes to lube the extension housing on the tail shaft. I'm just going to have a transfer case adapter, so I'm going to pull this thing out. I'm going to put a plug in. I ordered a plug, but it ended up being the wrong size, so what I did was I took the rubber seal one out of the kit and then I just welded the hole shut. Okay, so next I can go ahead and start to drive the anti-walkout bushing in. So it has this little lip on it. That's going to go on the outside. Normally it would go on the inside so the bushing doesn't walk out, but we're going to put this thing in backwards. So it does have these little grooves inside of it. There's 4 grooves on the outside, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 of them vertical with the case so that the other 2 are perpendicular. And this little notch right here is an oiling hole. So I want that to be lined up with this little notch right here. So essentially once this is driven in all the way, the fluid's going to come right in this hole and then it'll come right in this channel and inside the bushing. I'm also going to put a little bit of red Loctite on the bushing to put it in. So we'll get this thing in there and get it started. To drive it in, I'm just going to be using this end piece that was on the tail shaft. Alright, so we got the bushing in all the way seated. I'm going to go ahead and put the new seal in and then the snap ring on. And take a little bit of assembly lube. It's just transmission assembly lube. Put it around on the inside. We'll put some on the bushing. Alright, so we got a little bit of assembly lube on the seal inside and out. And now I'm just going to drive this thing in. Use the same method that we used to get the bushing in. I can go ahead and put the snap ring back in. Alright, so that should be good. Now I'll go ahead and drive that plug in. There we go, now we got a solid plug in. There's a little bit of a booger inside there because I TIG welded it, but it's sealed and that's all we need. Alright, so I still have to determine which shim or shims I'm going to use, but just for example, I want to show what it looks like. The shim is going to go over the bushing, and then the bearing has a black side, and the black side is going to go towards the case. So I'll put that on there. So now you can see that bushing actually holds the bearing and the shim in place, and the top of the bushing is actually flush with the top of the bearing. So that setup is replacing the factory setup, which is this 3-tang washer and this little brass washer that goes onto the rear carrier assembly. What I'm going to do to kind of get a ballpark of what shims to put in, I'm going to take a caliper and measure the thickness of this, and then I'll stack shims on the bearing, and then I'll get close to what this is. Alright, so we have both pieces here, and looks like it shows about 0.155 inches. So now I'll get the bearing and the washers, and we'll stack them up. First one that I put in there comes to about 0.148, so I'll grab a thicker one. So I did grab this shim here. We're looking at about 0.157, so that's pretty close. So this is just going to be the starting point. There is end play adjustments that should be done. I personally haven't done them before, and I've had luck just doing it this way. But if I do end up deciding to do the end play adjustments, I'll do that in a different video. Alright, and because I am converting it to an all-wheel drive setup, I do have a 4-wheel drive output shaft. So I'm going to take the 2-wheel drive output shaft off, and we'll put the other one on. So this is just a snap ring. Pull that off. Be careful, one of the pieces of the bearing came off. So put that back on right away. And we can go ahead and put the output shaft on and put the snap ring back on. And then we're ready to drop this section into the transmission. Also going to be putting in the new low roller sprig. As you can see, the transmission ended up having a broken one. This is the newer style. I believe it's 95 and up. It has the little feet on the bottom side. And then it just slides right in here. Just like that. Be careful not to pop the rollers out of it. And that section is ready to be dropped in the transmission. Jake's Performance Freshen Up Kit does come with the low reverse band, so I am going to put this thing in before I drop the rear carrier assembly in. These two little dimples here get hooked right onto those two little dowels that are sticking out. Alright, so I did take some fluid and just rub it around on the material on the inside of the band. There we go. Now the best method I've found to do this is just take a big vice grip clamp, clamp that little rib up there, and drop the whole thing in. Go ahead and double check and make sure that this thing is seated all the way and you do have that dowel pin on the band. I just pulled it back apart. I spun the output shaft and realized that I didn't have it seated all the way down. So pulled everything back out. Now I got the band seated and I'll put the rear back in again. Alright, so to double check this thing, I'm going to take the output shaft and just spin it. It should spin nice and free. You can also see the bearing moving along with the rear assembly. So it should look like that. If you feel any real resistance there, double check it, because you can't actually drive the bushing in too far and it'll rub on the back of the carrier. Alright, so there you have a new rollerized output in the rear. We have a new bushing, a new seal. We put the plug in for the rear lube port and swap the output shaft because it's not going to be a two-wheel drive anymore. Next video we'll start from the center support up, and that's when we'll actually start working on some of the trans brake modifications. There's one sealing ring that is removed from the center support for the dual feed mod, and then we'll start getting into some of the drums. So subscribe, stick around. This thing should be pretty fun. And do all of the things. Next video will work from the center support up and not